The encounter. Elijah Carter woke up to the hum of the city outside his modest studio apartment. The peeling paint on the walls and the faint smell of turpentine were reminders of his relentless pursuit of a dream. He had spent the past 2 years pouring his soul onto canvas, each stroke of his brush capturing the raw emotions he often found too difficult to express in words. Art had always been his sanctuary, a way to process the pain of growing up in a world that didn't always see him. Today, however, was different. Elijah had packed his best pieces, wrapped carefully in protective coverings, into a weathered portfolio case. He had been invited, well, more like encouraged by a friend, to visit Vance & Company Gallery, one of the most prestigious art spaces in the city. Elijah wasn't sure what to expect, but the mere thought of having his work seen by a gallery owner gave him hope. Maybe this was the breakthrough he'd been waiting for. The struggling artist. Elijah wasn't a stranger to hard work. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, he had watched his mother juggle multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. Though resources were scarce, Elijah's imagination was boundless. He spent hours sketching on scraps of paper and cardboard boxes, creating worlds where he could be anything he wanted. His mother noticed his gift early on and saved up enough to buy him his first set of paints for his 11th birthday. That day marked the beginning of his journey as an artist. Now 28, Elijah had refined his craft, but the art world remained elusive. He sold his work at local markets and online, scraping together enough to cover rent and supplies. His pieces, heavily influenced by African and urban culture, often depicted scenes of resilience, identity, and community. But Elijah craved more than just selling paintings. He wanted his work to be seen, to spark conversations and inspire change. The high-profile gallery. Vance & Company Gallery stood in stark contrast to Elijah's humble workspace. Located in the heart of the city's arts district, the building was a modern marvel, its glass facade shimmering in the sunlight. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume. Sculptures and paintings worth more than Elijah's annual income adorned the walls, each piece lit to perfection. Elijah's nerves buzzed as he approached the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman with sharp features and an even sharper tone, glanced up at him, her expression one of polite indifference. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her eyes briefly scanning his worn jacket and scuffed shoes. "I'm here to see Mr. Vance," Elijah replied, clutching his portfolio. "I'm an artist. I was hoping to get some feedback on my work." The receptionist arched a perfectly plucked eyebrow but picked up the phone. After a brief exchange, she motioned for him to take a seat. Elijah's heart pounded as he waited, his fingers tracing the edges of his portfolio. The meeting. Richard Vance entered the room with an air of authority, his tailored suit and gold watch exuding wealth and confidence. His salt and pepper hair was impeccably styled, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to assess Elijah in an instant. "Mr. Carter, is it?" Vance said, extending a hand that Elijah shook nervously. "Let's see what you've got." Elijah laid out his pieces on the sleek conference table, carefully unveiling each one. The vibrant colors and intricate details of his work filled the room with energy. One painting depicted a young black boy reaching for the stars, his hands surrounded by chains breaking apart. Another showed a bustling street scene in Harlem, alive with culture and history. For a moment, Vance said nothing. Then he chuckled, a dry, condescending sound that made Elijah's stomach churn. "Well," Vance began, "it's interesting. I suppose there's a market for this kind of thing, urban, gritty. But it's not what we cater to here. Our clients prefer more sophisticated art." Elijah blinked, unsure of how to respond. "I was hoping you could see the message in." "The message?" Vance interrupted, smirking. "Art isn't about messages, Mr. Carter. It's about aesthetics, prestige. Your work is amateurish at best. Perhaps it would do well at a flea market or street fair, but here?" He gestured to the luxurious gallery around them. "It simply doesn't belong." The words hit Elijah like a punch to the gut. He felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment, but more than that, with anger. He had expected critique, not ridicule. "I see," Elijah said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He began packing up his work, his movements deliberate. Vance leaned back in his chair, watching with a bemused expression. "Don't take it personally, kid. Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues." The walk of shame. As Elijah stepped out of the gallery, the weight of the encounter pressed down on him. The bustling city seemed to mock his failure, the chatter of passers-by blending into a cacophony of self-doubt. He clutched his portfolio tightly, resisting the urge to toss it into the nearest trash can. But as he walked, his thoughts began to shift. Yes, Vance's words had stung, but they also ignited something within him. Elijah had faced rejection before, and each time, he had used it as fuel to keep going. This time would be no different. By the time Elijah reached his studio, his resolve had solidified. He unpacked his paintings and placed them back on their easels. The vibrant colors seemed to radiate defiance, each stroke a testament to his resilience. Elijah sat down, picked up his brush, and began to paint. The humiliation he felt at the gallery transformed into determination, flowing through him and onto the canvas. He would prove Richard Vance wrong, not for validation, but for himself. Elijah's art wasn't just a hobby or a career, it was his voice, and he refused to let it be silenced. The spark of determination. As the night wore on, Elijah's studio filled with new creations. He painted furiously, his work brimming with raw emotion and untold stories. He thought about the countless artists who had been dismissed or underestimated because they didn't fit the mold, and he vowed to carve out a space for himself and others like him. Elijah knew it wouldn't be easy. The art world was as much about politics and connections as it was about talent. But he also knew that true art couldn't be confined to the walls of a gallery. It lived in the streets, in communities, and in the hearts of those who dared to dream. By the time dawn broke, Elijah was exhausted but exhilarated. His latest piece, a powerful depiction of a phoenix rising from ashes, stood as a symbol of his rebirth. It was time to show the world what he was capable of. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, Elijah prepared for the journey ahead. Little did he know, his story was just beginning, and the art world was about to witness a revolution it could never have anticipated: discovery and determination. Reflection and renewal. Elijah Carter sat in his studio, staring at the half-finished painting before him. The encounter at Vance and Company. Gallery played on a loop in his mind, the condescension in Richard Vance's voice echoing like a cruel refrain. The rejection had been brutal, but Elijah wasn't new to hardship. Growing up in a tough neighborhood had taught him that resilience was the key to survival. Still, this wasn't just about survival, it was about proving that his art, his voice, mattered. He leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. The vibrant colors and bold brushstrokes of his latest piece spoke to his identity, his heritage, and the stories of the community that shaped him. He thought about his mother, who had always encouraged him to dream big, and the kids in his neighborhood who saw his work and believed they could dream too. "No," he muttered to himself, picking up his brush. "I'm not giving up." Over the next few weeks, Elijah poured every ounce of his energy into his work. He revisited themes of resilience, joy, and cultural pride, blending them with abstract elements that made his pieces uniquely his. His studio became a hive of creativity, the walls adorned with paintings that felt like a rebellion against the rejection he'd faced. A chance encounter. One afternoon, while selling his art at a bustling outdoor market, Elijah met Margot Lane. She was a middle-aged woman with an air of quiet confidence, her gray hair swept back into a loose bun. Dressed in a flowing linen dress and oversized sunglasses, Margot stood out among the casual shoppers. She stopped at Elijah's stall, her keen eyes scanning his work with genuine interest. "This is incredible," Margot said, her voice warm and sincere. "The colors, the emotion, it's magnetic. Did you paint all of these?" Elijah, caught off guard by her enthusiasm, nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Every piece." Margot smiled, removing her sunglasses to get a closer look. you've got a gift, young man. What's your name? Elijah Carter. Well, Elijah, she said, gesturing to a painting of a young girl dancing under a streetlight, her shadow transforming into a regal queen, this is magic. Elijah couldn't help but smile. Thank you. I just try to tell stories through my work. And you're doing it beautifully, Margot said, turning to face him. Have you ever displayed your work in a gallery? The question made Elijah pause. He thought of his disastrous encounter with Richard Vance, but decided against mentioning it. Not yet, he said simply. I've been focusing on markets and online sales. Margot nodded thoughtfully. Well, you should. Your work deserves to be seen. If you're interested, I'd love to connect you with a few people I know. Elijah's skepticism flickered briefly. He'd heard promises before, but there was something about Margot's demeanor that felt genuine. I'd appreciate that, he said, handing her a business card he'd designed himself. Margot took it with a smile. I'll be in touch. Opening doors. True to her word, Margot reached out a few days later. She introduced Elijah to a network of collectors, curators, and gallery owners who valued diverse voices and unconventional art. One of them, a curator named Luis Mendoza, invited Elijah to participate in a group exhibition at a community art space. The theme of the exhibit was Voices of the Undervalued, and Elijah's work fit perfectly. The opening night of the exhibition was a revelation for Elijah. The gallery buzzed with energy as people from all walks of life admired his paintings. He stood by his pieces, answering questions and listening to the stories his art evoked in others. For the first time, he felt seen, not just as an artist, but as a storyteller. Margot was there, beaming with pride as she introduced Elijah to influential figures in the art world. One of them, a journalist from a major publication, was particularly taken with his work. Within weeks, an article featuring Elijah and his journey appeared in the magazine, bringing his art to a broader audience. The value of his work. As Elijah's reputation grew, so did the demand for his art. Margot became his unofficial mentor, teaching him how to navigate the complexities of the art market. She helped him price his work appropriately, emphasizing its value not just in terms of material cost, but in the cultural and emotional significance it carried. Elijah, she said one afternoon over coffee, your art isn't just paintings on a canvas. It's a bridge between worlds, a way to tell stories that need to be heard. Never undervalue that. Margot's words stayed with Elijah as he continued to create and sell his work. His paintings, once priced modestly, began to fetch higher amounts as collectors recognized their worth. With each sale, Elijah felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. The boy who once sketched on cardboard boxes was now an artist whose pieces were displayed in galleries and private collections. Critical acclaim. Elijah's breakthrough came when one of his pieces, Breaking Chains, was featured in a solo exhibition at a prominent gallery that specialized in emerging artists. The painting, which depicted a black man surrounded by broken chains and golden rays of light, was hailed as a masterpiece. Critics praised its raw emotion and powerful symbolism, calling it a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The success of the exhibition cemented Elijah's place in the art world. Collectors clamored to purchase his work, and invitations to exhibit in other cities poured in. Despite the newfound attention, Elijah remained grounded, remembering the struggles that had shaped him. A new chapter. As Elijah's career flourished, he began to reflect on what Margot had done for him. Her belief in his talent had opened doors he never thought possible, and he was determined to pay it forward. He started collaborating with community organizations, offering workshops for young artists from marginalized backgrounds. Through his journey, Elijah discovered not just his own resilience, but the transformative power of art to inspire, connect, and heal. His determination had turned a moment of rejection into a story of triumph, and he was just getting started. The rise to fame. A symbol of resilience. Elijah Carter's name began to ripple through the art world like a quiet storm. What had started as a small feature in local exhibitions had grown into something much larger. His art, unapologetically vibrant and steeped in cultural narrative, resonated deeply with audiences. Each piece told a story of identity, struggle, hope, and triumph. They weren't just paintings, they were declarations of existence, reflections of a history often overlooked. His most celebrated piece, Breaking Chains, became a centerpiece for conversations about race, resilience, and empowerment. It was featured in exhibitions across major cities, from New York to Chicago, and even abroad in London and Paris. Elijah's ability to translate complex emotions into visual poetry made him a standout in an industry that often prioritized aesthetics over meaning. Critics lauded his work as a visual symphony of untold stories. One article in Art Nouveau Weekly described Elijah as the voice of a generation, painting truths that resonate far beyond the canvas. Elijah read the reviews with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. For years, he had created art in obscurity, his only audience being those who wandered through local markets. Now, his name was on the lips of collectors, critics, and curators worldwide. Media spotlight. Elijah's rise didn't go unnoticed by the media. His story, a Black artist who had faced rejection and risen to acclaim, captivated journalists and audiences alike. Publications ran features on his journey, highlighting the stark contrast between his humble beginnings and his meteoric success. One morning, Elijah found himself sitting in a sleek studio for a live interview on a popular morning show. The host, a charismatic woman named Julia, introduced him with glowing praise. Elijah Carter's work has taken the art world by storm, Julia said, smiling into the camera. But his journey is just as inspiring as his art. From selling paintings at street markets to headlining major exhibitions, Elijah's story is one of resilience and triumph. Welcome to the show, Elijah. Elijah adjusted his tie nervously but smiled. Thank you for having me. As the interview progressed, Elijah spoke about his creative process, his influences, and the importance of representation in the art world. When Julia asked about the challenges he faced, he hesitated briefly before recounting his experience with Richard Vance. It was a tough moment, Elijah admitted, but it pushed me to keep going. Art isn't just about being accepted, it's about creating something meaningful, something that connects with people. The clip of Elijah's interview went viral, sparking conversations about the barriers faced by artists from marginalized communities. Social media lit up with praise for Elijah, and his work gained even more traction. The international stage. Elijah's growing fame attracted the attention of investors and gallery owners worldwide. Invitations to exhibit at prestigious events flooded in, each one offering him a chance to reach new audiences. One invitation, however, stood out, a personal request to showcase his work at the International Art Auction in Venice. The Venice event was a glittering affair, attended by elite collectors, celebrities, and art connoisseurs. Elijah's pieces were displayed alongside works by some of the most celebrated contemporary artists. The event was both an opportunity and a challenge, it was a stage where only the best thrived. On the night of the auction, Elijah stood in the Grand Hall, his heart pounding as he watched bidders compete for his painting, Roots of Resilience. The piece depicted a towering tree with roots intertwining through a network of faces, each one representing a story of struggle and strength. The bidding started at $500,000 and quickly escalated. When the final gavel struck, the painting had sold for $3.2 million. Elijah's hands trembled as he signed the paperwork, his mind struggling to process the moment. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation, the realization that his art had transcended boundaries and touched lives. An unlikely buyer. Among the bidders at the Venice auction was none other than Richard Vance. Now in his late 50s, Vance was still a prominent figure in the art world, though his gallery's reputation had begun to wane in recent years. Unaware of the artist's identity, he had been captivated by Roots of Resilience and entered the bidding war with his usual confidence. Vance's assistant leaned over during the auction. "That piece is by a rising star, Elijah Carter. His work has been making waves lately." Vance nodded, dismissing the comment with a wave of his hand. "I know talent when I see it," he replied, convinced that acquiring the painting would bolster his gallery's prestige. When Vance won the bid, he felt a rush of satisfaction. "This," he told his assistant, "is exactly the kind of piece that will bring a fresh edge to my collection." It wasn't until weeks later, as Vance prepared to unveil the painting in his gallery, that he learned the truth. A feature article about Elijah's journey appeared in a major publication, complete with photos of the artist and his work. Vance froze as he recognized the young man he had dismissed so harshly years ago. "Elijah Carter," Vance muttered, his face pale. The name was now synonymous with success, resilience, and a movement that had shaken the art world. And he, Richard Vance, had unknowingly purchased a piece from the very artist he had mocked. The irony of fame. The realization left Vance reeling. His initial instinct was to keep the story quiet, to avoid the inevitable questions about his past encounter with Elijah. But the art world had a way of unearthing stories, and soon, whispers began circulating about the irony of Vance's purchase. Meanwhile, Elijah continued to thrive. He learned of Vance's acquisition through a mutual acquaintance and couldn't help but laugh at the twist of fate. It wasn't about revenge. Elijah had long since moved past the sting of rejection, but there was a certain poetic justice in knowing that his work now adorned the walls of the very gallery that had once turned him away. A new perspective. As Elijah's fame grew, he stayed true to the principles that had guided him from the start. His art wasn't about wealth or prestige, it was about connection, storytelling, and empowerment. He used his platform to uplift other artists, creating opportunities for those who, like him, had faced barriers to entry. Through his foundation, Canvas of Change, Elijah funded programs for young artists from underrepresented backgrounds. The initiative provided mentorship, resources, and exhibition opportunities, ensuring that the next generation of talent had a fighting chance. For Elijah, success wasn't just about reaching the top, it was about bringing others with him. His story, once defined by struggle, had become a beacon of hope for countless aspiring artists. A turn of tables. The revelation. The stark realization that he had purchased a piece by Elijah Carter hit Richard Vance like a bolt of lightning. For weeks, he had reveled in the acclaim surrounding his acquisition of Roots of Resilience. Visitors to his gallery marveled at the painting, and Richard basked in their admiration, touting it as evidence of his impeccable eye for talent. But the article exposing Elijah's identity changed everything. The words on the page blurred as Richard's mind raced back to that day, the struggling young artist, his bold, soulful paintings, and the casual dismissal Richard had thought nothing of. The same artist was now heralded as the voice of a generation, his work celebrated worldwide. And Richard had mocked him. The irony stung, but Richard wasn't a man to let humiliation linger. He saw an opportunity. If Elijah Carter had become the sensation everyone claimed, then aligning with him could restore the prestige his gallery had started to lose. All Richard needed to do was reach out, extend a hand of reconciliation, and propose a partnership. An unwelcome invitation. Richard drafted a carefully worded letter, inviting Elijah to his gallery for a private meeting. He emphasized his admiration for Elijah's work, claiming he had always seen its potential and wanted to discuss a collaboration that would bring their shared vision to life. The letter arrived at Elijah's studio, in a thick envelope embossed with the Vance & Company gallery logo. Elijah opened it, skimming the contents with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. Shared vision? The audacity of Richard to rewrite their history as if the condescension and mockery had never occurred was almost laughable. Elijah placed the letter on his desk, staring at it for a long moment before picking up his phone and calling his assistant. "Get me a meeting with my lawyer," he said. "I think it's time to revisit an idea I've been considering." The power shift. Weeks later, news broke that Richard Vance was selling his gallery. Financial strains, exacerbated by declining foot traffic and mounting competition, had left him little choice. The buyer was rumored to be an up-and-coming art investor with grand plans for revitalizing the space. Richard hoped the new owner would honor the legacy of the gallery, preserving its reputation as a hub for elite art. But when the sale was finalized, he received a shock that left him reeling. The new owner was none other than Elijah Carter. The news spread like wildfire. Articles lauded Elijah's bold move as a poetic reversal of fortune. From rejection to ownership, one headline read, "Capturing the triumphant arc of Elijah's journey." The gallery's transformation. Under Elijah's ownership, the gallery underwent a dramatic transformation. Gone were the cold, impersonal displays of abstract luxury pieces. In their place were vibrant works by underrepresented artists from across the globe. The gallery, renamed the Resilience Collective, became a beacon for marginalized voices, a space where stories that had been overlooked were finally given a platform. The grand reopening drew a diverse crowd of art enthusiasts, critics, and media outlets. Elijah stood at the center of it all, greeting visitors with warmth and humility. The evening was a celebration of art as a unifying force, and Elijah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. Richard, however, wasn't among the attendees. He had received an invitation, but shame kept him away. Instead, he watched from the sidelines as the gallery he had once owned flourished under new leadership. The confrontation. Despite his initial reluctance, Richard knew he couldn't avoid Elijah forever. One evening, as the gallery was winding down for the day, Richard walked through its doors, his footsteps hesitant. Elijah was sitting at the reception desk, reviewing plans for an upcoming exhibit. When he looked up and saw Richard, a flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by a calm, measured expression. "Richard," Elijah said, setting his papers aside. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Richard cleared his throat, struggling to find the right words. "I wanted to congratulate you on what you've done with the gallery. It's impressive." "Thank you," Elijah replied, his tone polite but guarded. There was a pause, heavy with unspoken tension. Finally, Richard sighed and said, "Elijah, I owe you an apology. For what I said to you years ago, and for how I treated you. It was wrong." Elijah leaned back in his chair, studying Richard carefully. "You mean when you told me my work belonged at a flea market?" Richard winced. "Yes. That. I was arrogant, blind to the value of your art. I can see that now." Elijah nodded slowly. "It's not easy admitting you were wrong. I appreciate that. But you need to understand something, Richard, your rejection wasn't just about me. It was about every artist who looks like me, whose work doesn't fit the narrow standards you catered to." "I know," Richard said quietly. "I've been reflecting on that. Seeing what you've done here, it's opened my eyes. And I'd like to help, if you'll let me." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Help? How?" "I still have connections," Richard said. "I could bring in buyers, investors, people who can take this gallery to the next level." Elijah considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but this gallery isn't about catering to the elite. It's about creating a space where every artist has a chance, where art isn't judged by how much it sells for but by the stories it tells." Richard looked at him, a flicker of something like regret in his eyes. "I understand," he said. "But if there's ever a way I can contribute, I'd like to. Not for me, but because I believe in what you're doing." Lessons learned. As Richard left the gallery that evening, he couldn't help but feel a sense of loss, not just for the gallery, but for the opportunities he had squandered over the years by refusing to see beyond his own biases. Elijah's success was a reminder that the art world was changing, and it was a change Richard hadn't been prepared for. For Elijah, the encounter marked a turning point. While he didn't trust Richard enough to accept his help, he saw the interaction as a sign of progress. The same man who had once dismissed him was now seeking his approval, a testament to how far Elijah had come. A new era. Under Elijah's leadership, the Resilience Collective became more than just a gallery, it became a movement. It inspired other artists and curators to rethink the way art was valued and showcased. Elijah's journey, from rejection to ownership, became a story of hope and transformation, proving that even in the face of adversity, resilience could pave the way for change. As the gallery thrived, Elijah knew one thing for certain: he had turned the tables, not out of spite, but out of a desire to create something meaningful. And in doing so, he had redefined what success truly meant. Redemption and legacy. Mentorship and the next generation. Elijah Carter stood in the heart of the Resilience Collective, watching a group of young artists sketch on easels scattered across the gallery floor. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows illuminated their work, vivid expressions of identity, culture, and emotion. Each piece was as unique as its creator, and Elijah felt a deep sense of pride. These were the voices he had fought for, the stories he had vowed to amplify. The Canvas of Change Foundation, Elijah's brainchild, had become a beacon of hope for young artists from marginalized communities. The foundation provided mentorship programs, scholarships, and resources to those who had the talent but lacked the means to pursue their dreams. Elijah personally led workshops, sharing his journey and teaching the skills he had honed over the years. One such artist was Maya, a 17-year-old with a gift for blending traditional African patterns with surrealist imagery. She had nearly abandoned her passion after being told by a high school teacher that art was impractical. Through the foundation, Maya found not just the tools to create but a community that celebrated her voice. Today, her work hung prominently in the gallery, her name whispered with awe by visitors. Elijah's belief in the transformative power of art extended beyond the individual. He saw it as a force that could reshape society, challenging stereotypes and fostering understanding. Through the Resilience Collective and the Foundation, he aimed to build a legacy of empowerment and inclusivity. A thriving hub of innovation. Under Elijah's leadership, the Resilience Collective had become a global phenomenon. The gallery was no longer just a space for displaying art, it was a cultural hub, hosting events, performances, and panel discussions that brought together creators, critics, and audiences from around the world. The walls of the gallery were adorned with pieces from diverse artists, a sculpture made from recycled materials by a Syrian refugee, a mural celebrating indigenous traditions by a Canadian painter, and a digital installation exploring gender identity by a non-binary artist from Brazil. Each exhibit was a testament to the universality of art and the unique stories it could tell. Critics hailed the gallery as a revolutionary force in the art world. Visitors came not just to admire the work, but to engage in conversations that challenged their perceptions. Elijah's vision had turned what was once an exclusive, elitist space into a sanctuary for innovation and cultural pride. Richard seeks redemption. Richard Vance had been watching from the sidelines, grappling with the weight of his past actions and the undeniable brilliance of what Elijah had built. The gallery that he had once dismissed as gritty and unpolished was now the epicenter of a movement that was reshaping the art world. And while Richard was no longer the influential figure he once was, he couldn't shake the feeling that he still had something to offer. One afternoon, Richard arrived at the gallery unannounced. The staff, recognizing him, hesitated before allowing him through. When Elijah saw him standing in the doorway, he felt a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Richard," Elijah said, setting aside the portfolio he had been reviewing. "This is unexpected." "I know I don't deserve your time," Richard began, his tone unusually humble. "But I needed to come here, to see what you've done. It's extraordinary." Elijah gestured for him to sit. "Thank you. What brings you here?" Richard hesitated, then said, "I've spent the past few months reflecting on my mistakes, on how I dismissed you and so many others because I was too narrow-minded to see beyond my own biases. I want to change that. I want to contribute to what you're building here." Elijah leaned back, studying Richard carefully. "And how do you propose to do that?" "I have connections, resources," Richard said. "I've been in this industry long enough to know how to navigate its complexities. I could help you expand your reach, bring even more attention to the artists you're showcasing. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm asking for a chance to make amends." A decision of forgiveness. Elijah was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the paintings lining the walls. He thought about the younger version of himself, standing in Richard's gallery, clutching his portfolio and hoping for validation. He thought about the pain of rejection and the long road that had brought him to this moment. I don't know if I can fully trust you, Richard, Elijah said finally. But I believe in second chances. If you're serious about contributing, I'll give you an opportunity to prove it. Richard nodded, relief washing over his face. Thank you, Elijah. I promise, I won't let you down. Elijah extended a hand, and Richard shook it firmly. The moment wasn't just a handshake, it was a bridge between their past and a potential future of collaboration. The transformative power of art. In the months that followed, Richard became an active contributor to the gallery's mission. He used his network to secure funding for new programs and helped organize an international art fair that brought together creators from underrepresented backgrounds. While Elijah remained cautious, he began to see genuine change in Richard, a willingness to listen, learn, and advocate for the very artists he had once overlooked. The gallery flourished even more, its impact rippling across the art world. Elijah's story continued to inspire, proving that resilience and authenticity could overcome even the most entrenched barriers. One evening, as Elijah walked through the gallery after hours, he paused before Roots of Resilience, the painting that had marked his rise to fame. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the rejection, the determination, the unexpected twists of fate. And he thought about Richard, whose transformation mirrored the gallery's evolution from exclusivity to inclusivity. Art, Elijah realized, wasn't just about beauty or expression. It was about connection, growth, and the power to change minds and hearts. A legacy of hope. Years later, as Elijah stood at the opening of a new gallery in Johannesburg, a sister space to the Resilience Collective, he addressed a crowd of artists and art lovers. Art, he said, his voice steady, isn't just paint on canvas or shapes in clay. It's a language that transcends borders, a force that bridges divides. It has the power to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. As the crowd erupted in applause, Elijah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey, once marked by rejection and struggle, had become a beacon of hope for countless others. And while the wounds of the past would never fully heal, they had given him the strength to build a legacy defined by resilience, compassion, and the belief in the transformative power of art.